All right. This is one of those stories where everything looks perfectly fine from the outside. Nice house, good jobs, regular dinners with family. The kind of life people post about and call blessed. And for a long time, Noah Carter believed that too. At least, he wanted to. Because here's the thing about a comfortable life. It can make you very good at ignoring things that don't quite fit the picture. Small things. The kind that don't seem worth mentioning on their own. The kind you file away under, "I'm probably overthinking it." And Noah? He was very good at that. Until one night, one dinner, where a single sentence changed the entire frame of everything he'd been looking at. Not a dramatic fight, not a confession, not a blow-up. Just 7 words. Calm. Casual. Almost offhand. And somehow, that made it worse. This is Noah's story. In his own words, "My name is Noah Carter. And if you'd asked me 2 years ago how my marriage was going, I would have said fine. Not great. Not terrible. Fine." Which, looking back, probably should have told me something. Emily and I had been married for 6 years at that point. We met in our late 20s, got engaged after 2 years of dating, had a wedding that her mother mostly planned, and settled into a house in a quiet suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio. I was in project management for a mid-sized logistics company. Emily worked in pharmaceutical sales, good money, flexible schedule, a lot of client dinners and conference calls. We didn't have kids yet, we'd talked about it. Never quite landed on a timeline. From the outside, we were exactly what a functional adult couple is supposed to look like. And from the inside, most days it felt okay. Not electric, not the kind of thing you write songs about, but steady. I told myself steady was good. Steady meant we weren't blowing up every other week. Steady meant we were mature. That's what I told myself. The first thing I noticed, and I want to be clear, I didn't notice it as a thing at first, was a change in how Emily talked to me in front of other people, not at home. At home, she was normal, polite, sometimes distant, but nothing I could point to directly. But in group settings, something had shifted. It started small. We'd be at dinner with friends, maybe 3 or 4 couples we'd known for years, and Emily would make a comment. Not mean, exactly. More like dismissive. The kind of joke that has a little too much truth in it to be entirely a joke. Things like, "Oh, Noah wouldn't know. He doesn't really follow that stuff." Or, "That's a little ambitious for us, right, Noah?" Or my personal favorite, "He means well." That one, said with a smile. He means well, like I was a golden retriever who'd just knocked something over. I didn't say anything the first few times. I laughed it off. Or I just went quiet and moved the conversation along. I wasn't the type to make a scene, and honestly, I second-guessed myself. Was I being too sensitive? Was it really that bad? Maybe. Maybe not. But here's what I did notice. Nobody else's wife was doing that. I paid attention after a while. And yeah, couples banter. Couples tease each other. That's normal. But there's a difference between affectionate teasing and someone consistently positioning you as the lesser person in the room. And Emily had started doing the latter. I brought it up once. Gently. I told her I felt like she sometimes made me the butt of jokes in front of people. And it bothered me. She looked at me for a second, that particular look, the one that means you're being ridiculous, and said, "I'm just joking around, Noah. You're so sensitive, so." That was that. I filed it away. Added it to the folder in my head that I was pretending didn't exist yet. A few months later, I started noticing something else. Emily had always been social. That was part of who she was. She had her work friends, her college friends, who she'd occasionally visit, a book club she barely went to but kept paying for. I was never the type to monitor her schedule. That's not who I am. I trusted her, fully. But around month 3 of what I was now privately calling the vague unease, her schedule got busy in a way that felt different. She was out more. Not dramatically, not suspiciously, just more. Late client, after-work drinks that ran long. A weekend trip to visit her friend Dana in Pittsburgh that got extended by an extra day because, and I'm quoting here, "we were having such a good time and Dana really needed someone to talk to." Which, fine. That could be true. I had no reason to think it wasn't. But here's where it gets interesting. About 3 weeks after the Pittsburgh trip, I ran into Dana, completely by chance. She was in Columbus for a conference and texted Emily, who brought her over for dinner one evening. And at some point during the meal, I mentioned something about the extended weekend. Something casual, like Emily said you two were really catching up. And Dana smiled and said, "Yes, it was great to see her." Normal response. Except Dana's smile had about a half-second delay, and her eyes went to Emily first now. I want to be fair to myself here. I didn't blow that up into something. I noticed it, I stored it, I moved on. Because I'd been wrong before. That's important context. 2 years into our marriage, I went through a phase where I convinced myself something was going on with Emily and a coworker named Brett. I built a whole case in my head, late texts, a lunch that ran long, a particular energy when his name came up. I was ready to have a confrontation. And then I found out Brett was engaged to a man named Carlos, and Emily had been helping plan their engagement party as a surprise. So, yeah, I was capable of seeing things that weren't there. That experience made me careful, made me slow down, made me question my own read before acting on it, which is, I think, exactly the position I was supposed to be in. Because here's the thing about patterns. You can explain away one thing. You can explain away two things. By the time you get to 5 or 6, the explanations start requiring more effort than the pattern does, and I was starting to feel that effort. But I wasn't there yet, not in part 1. In part 1, I was still the guy who sat at dinner parties laughing politely when my wife made a subtle joke about my ambition level. Still the guy who drove home in silence and told himself it wasn't that bad. Still the guy who thought steady was enough. That was about to change. There's a particular type of exhaustion that comes from being in a relationship where you're always slightly on edge but can never quite justify why. It's not dramatic. Nobody's throwing plates. Nobody's storming out. On the surface, everything is functional. Meals get made, bills get paid, conversations happen. But underneath all of that is this low hum, like a noise in the walls you can't locate. And you start to wonder whether you're hearing something real or whether you're just losing your mind slowly. That was my life for roughly the 6 months leading up to the dinner. And the thing about patterns, real patterns, not the kind I'd imagined with Brett, is that they don't announce themselves. They accumulate, quietly, until one day you look back and realize you've been watching the same scene play on repeat and just kept giving it a different title. Let me walk you through what I was actually looking at. The comments in public got more frequent, not more aggressive. That's what made them hard to name. Emily wasn't cruel. She didn't yell at me or tear me down in obvious ways. It was more surgical than that, a well-placed word here, a small correction there, a laugh at my expense that the whole table joined in on before I'd fully processed what had just happened. At a birthday dinner for her friend Jess, I mentioned I was thinking about applying for a director-level position at work. I was excited about it. It was the kind of move I'd been working toward for a while, and I'd just found out the role was opening up. Emily tilted her head slightly and said, "That's a big jump, babe. Are you sure that's the right fit?" To the table, in front of 6 people. Not privately. Not later that night when we got home. Right there in the middle of the conversation, before I'd even finished explaining what the role was. The table went briefly quiet. Someone changed the subject. I smiled and let it go. But I sat with it for a long time after. Because here's what bothered me. It wasn't the doubt itself. Doubt is fair. You can have private doubts about your partner's decisions, and that's completely normal. What bothered me was the venue, the casual public nature of it. Like my professional confidence was a thing she could redirect in front of an audience without it being a big deal. That stuck. Then there was the phone. Emily had always been protective of her phone. Not paranoid, just private. She kept it face down, took to the other room sometimes, didn't leave it sitting around. I'd noticed it before but never read much into it. Some people are just like that. But around month 4 of the vague unease, the phone behavior intensified. She started sleeping with it on her side of the bed. Not on the nightstand, in her hand or under the pillow. She'd take it into the bathroom when she showered, which she hadn't done before. And twice, I walked into the room and she switched the screen off before I fully entered. Not frantically, not guiltily, but with that particular practiced casualness that's actually more telling than panic. Because panic is reactive. That kind of practiced calm is deliberate. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I started paying attention to timing instead. Emily's job had always involved some unpredictability. Client calls in the evening, occasional late nights before a big pitch. That was normal, and I'd never questioned it. But now I started noticing the pattern inside the pattern. The late evenings tended to cluster. 3 in 1 week, then nothing for 2 weeks, then 4 in a row. Not a steady work rhythm. A rhythm that looked more like someone managing a schedule around someone else's availability. I could be wrong. I knew I could be wrong. But I also knew that I wasn't the guy who'd invented things out of nothing. The Brett situation had made me careful. It had not made me blind. The emotional distance was the hardest part to sit with. Emily and I had never been the most overtly affectionate couple. That wasn't really our dynamic. But there'd always been a baseline of connection, inside jokes, small moments. The comfortable familiarity of two people who knew each other well. That was fading. She seemed distracted in conversations. Not rude, just elsewhere. Like part of her brain was consistently occupied with something I didn't have access to. When I'd ask about her day, the answers were fine but abbreviated. When I'd suggest something, dinner out, a weekend trip, just a movie at home, the responses were agreeable but flat, present in form, absent in substance. And then there was the way she talked about work. Emily had always mentioned her colleagues by name. It was part of how she communicated. She'd tell a story from the office, and the people in it had names and personalities and context. That had stopped. Now, when she mentioned work, it was vague. Some people from the office. A client thing. Just work stuff. Which meant I'd lost the cast of characters. Which meant I couldn't ask follow-up questions that connected to anything specific. Which meant the conversation stayed surface level. Whether that was intentional or not, I couldn't say. But it had a very clean effect. I stopped being able to locate her in her own life. I want to be honest about something here. During this whole period, I did consider that I might be wrong. Seriously considered it. I ran the alternative explanations. Work stress. Plausible. A rough patch that couples go through. Possible. Me being oversensitive after years of feeling slowly diminished. Also on the table. But here's what I kept coming back to. A rough patch feels like distance. What I was experiencing felt like management, like I was being carefully handled. And people don't carefully manage someone they feel nothing is wrong with. The thing that finally shifted me from unease into certainty, or close to it, wasn't a single piece of evidence. It was a conversation that didn't happen. We were driving home from her parents one Sunday evening. It had been a good day, actually. Relaxed. Her mom had made a big lunch. Her brother had come by with his kids. The whole thing was genuinely nice. And in the car, Emily turned to me. I remember this clearly, and she started to say something. She opened her mouth, paused, and then closed it again and looked back out the window. "What?" I asked. "Nothing," she said. "Never mind." And that was it. But I'd seen something in that half second. Something that looked like she was about to say something real. Something that had weight to it. And then she'd pulled it back. I didn't push. I didn't want to hear something I wasn't ready for while driving on a highway at 60 miles an hour. But I thought about it for a long time afterward. Still do. I think she almost said something that night. I think she decided not to. And honestly, that told me more than most things. I want to be careful here about how I describe this part of the story. Because when most people hear "I found proof," they picture something dramatic. A confrontation. An explosion of emotion. The whole thing unraveling in one terrible moment. That's not what happened. What happened was quieter, more methodical. And honestly, a little bit devastating in the way that slow things can be, because there's no adrenaline to carry you through it. It's just you, sitting with information you can't unknow, deciding what to do next. It started with a receipt. I wasn't snooping. I want to say that clearly because it matters to me. I wasn't going through Emily's things. I was looking for the car insurance renewal form that I'd asked her to grab from the glove box a week earlier, and she'd said she put it in the kitchen drawer with the other paperwork. It wasn't in the kitchen drawer. I checked the pile of mail on the counter. I checked the small basket she used for receipts and random papers. And in that basket, under a drugstore receipt and a dry cleaning ticket, I found a dinner receipt from a restaurant called Meridian, which was about 40 minutes from our house, in a part of the city we almost never went to. The date was a Tuesday, 3 weeks earlier. Emily had told me she was at a late client dinner downtown that night. I remembered it specifically because I'd asked if she wanted me to wait up, and she'd said, "No, go to sleep, it's going to run late." The receipt was for two, a two-person dinner, wine, an appetizer shared, the full thing. Now, seats don't tell you everything. A client dinner could absolutely be two people. That's completely normal. But the restaurant wasn't downtown. It was in a quiet neighborhood 40 minutes away. And the restaurant itself, I looked it up, was the kind of place where you're not taking a client. Small, candlelit, reservations only, known for long meals. Not the kind of place where you talk numbers and shake hands. The kind of place where you go with someone you want to be alone with. I held the receipt for a while. Then I put it back exactly where I found it. I didn't say anything to Emily that night, or the next night. I needed to think. Over the next 2 weeks, I paid closer attention, careful attention. Not obsessive, I wasn't following her or installing anything. I was just watching the information that already moved through our shared life. Credit card statements. We had a joint card we'd always used for household expenses. Emily also had her own card, which I'd never paid close attention to because we'd always been financially independent in that way. But the statements came to the house. I started reading them. The charges told a story. Not a dramatic one, a quiet one. Lunch spots I didn't recognize. A hotel bar tab on a day she'd told me she was in a work training across town. 2 charges at the same coffee shop on the same day, 2 hours apart, which probably means nothing on its own, but in context, in the pattern, it meant something. And then there was the name. I found it by accident, honestly. Emily had left her laptop open on the kitchen counter while she went to answer the door. A delivery. Took maybe 3 minutes. I walked past the counter to get a glass of water. I wasn't trying to look, but the screen was right there. And in the corner of the screen, in the still visible messaging app she hadn't fully minimized, I could see the top of a conversation thread. The name at the top was Marcus. I didn't read the messages. I was past the counter before it fully registered, and by the time I processed it, I could hear the door closing. But I'd seen enough. The name. The tone of the visible line, not work tone, not formal, not clipped. Warm, familiar. Marcus. I spent the next 2 days being very calm and very normal and feeling like I was made of glass on the inside. I thought about whether I was doing the Brett thing again. I ran it, honestly. But the Brett situation had been circumstantial and thin. This was layered. The receipt, the card statements, the phone behavior, the distance, the name. These were not unconnected things that I was forcing into a pattern. These were pieces of the same picture. I remember the exact moment I stopped questioning myself. It was a Thursday morning. Emily was in the shower. Her phone was on the nightstand. She'd set it down to grab a charger from the other room and forgotten it for about 45 seconds. It buzzed. I didn't pick it up. I didn't touch it. But the screen lit up with a notification, and I could read the preview from where I was sitting. It was a text. From M, the preview said, "Last night was," and then it cut off. That was enough. At that point, it stopped being a feeling. It became a fact. And the strange thing about that moment, the thing I didn't expect, was how calm I felt. Not numb, calm. Like something I'd been bracing against had finally arrived, and the bracing was over. I knew what was happening. I knew it clearly. Now I had to decide what to do with it. I need you to understand something about who I am before this part of the story makes sense. I'm not a confrontational person by nature. I never have been. I don't like scenes. I don't like raised voices. I don't like the feeling of a room where everyone is braced for something to happen. Some people see that as a weakness. Maybe it is sometimes. But in this situation, it turned out to be an advantage. Because the thing I wanted, more than anger, more than a scene, more than the satisfaction of watching Emily's face fall in the moment I told her I knew, was clarity, completeness, the full picture. I wanted to understand exactly what I'd been living inside before I walked out of it, and I wanted to do it right. So instead of confronting Emily the morning after I saw that text preview, I did nothing. I made coffee. I asked if she slept okay. I told her I had an early meeting and left the house before she did. And then I spent the next 3 weeks paying very careful attention. I confirmed Marcus's last name through a combination of things that were already available to me without any invasion of privacy. Emily's work directory, which was publicly accessible through her company's website, and a mention of him in a LinkedIn connection notification I'd seen months earlier and hadn't thought about until now. Marcus Hale, pharmaceutical sales rep, same company, different territory but overlapping region, based out of their downtown office. Once I had a name and a face, things clicked into place quickly. I remembered Emily mentioning Marcus maybe twice in the previous year. Once in passing, once as part of a story about a work conference. She'd kept him offhand, casual. The way you keep someone offhand when keeping them casual is the point. I went back through the credit card statements more carefully. The hotel bar tab, that downtown hotel, the one she'd supposedly been at for a training day, it was 2 miles from Marcus's listed office address. I'm not going to pretend that didn't hit differently once I made that connection. It did. But I kept moving, because I wasn't building a case for emotion. I was building a case for a decision. The bigger thing I was navigating during this period was the upcoming dinner. Emily's parents hosted a monthly family dinner. Her parents, her brother Daniel and his wife, sometimes an aunt or two, occasionally a family friend. It was a long-standing tradition. I'd been part of it for almost 7 years. These were people I genuinely liked, people who thought of me as family. The next one was scheduled for a Saturday, 3 weeks out. Emily had confirmed we were going. I had confirmed I was going. I had also quietly decided that this was going to be the last one. Not because I was planning a confrontation there. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't going to make a scene at her parents' dinner table. That's not who I am. But I knew with a kind of cold certainty that by the time I walked out of that dinner, I would know exactly where things stood. Because Emily had a habit, I'd noticed it, of becoming more comfortable in family settings, more herself. And more herself lately meant someone who saw me as an easy target for small corrections. I wanted to see it clearly one final time before I left, so I showed up to that dinner with my eyes completely open. And Emily, to her credit, I suppose, if credit is the right word, didn't disappoint. The dinner started normally. Good food, comfortable family conversation. Her brother Daniel was funny as always. Her mother had made a lasagna that had been a family staple for decades. Everything looked exactly the way it was supposed to look. And then, about 40 minutes in, the conversation turned to careers, specifically to mine. Her father asked how work was going. I mentioned, without fanfare, just as a piece of news, that I'd gotten the director position. I'd actually gotten it 2 weeks earlier, but I'd been quiet about it, mostly processing things privately. There was a round of genuine congratulations from the table, and then Emily, with the timing of someone who'd practiced it, who had made this exact move so many times that it came naturally, said, "I should have chosen someone else." Just like that. Calm, almost offhand. With a little smile, like it was a joke, like it was the kind of thing you could say and wave away with a laugh. The table went momentarily quiet. Her father cleared his throat and said something that was meant to redirect the conversation. Daniel looked at me and then away. Her mother touched the edge of her napkin, and I sat there, very still, very quiet, because in that moment something I'd been carrying for months, the effort, the patience, the careful and deliberate restraint, just dissolved. Not into rage. I want to be clear about that. Not into grief, not into the kind of pain that demands immediate release. Into stillness, complete, decided stillness. I smiled politely for the rest of that dinner. I helped clear plates. I thanked her parents genuinely, because I did genuinely feel something for them. I hugged her mother, shook her father's hand, said goodbye to Daniel, and I was very aware as I walked to the car that I was saying goodbye to all of it. We drove home mostly in silence, which wasn't unusual. We'd driven home in silence a lot lately. But this silence felt different. This one wasn't the silence of two people avoiding something. It was the silence of one person who had already arrived somewhere, and another person who hadn't noticed yet. When we got inside, Emily went to the kitchen. I heard the fridge open. Normal sounds. Normal end of a normal evening, from her side of it. I sat down in the living room and waited. She came in a few minutes later with a glass of water, settled onto the couch, and asked if I was okay. I'd been quiet at dinner, apparently. Quieter than usual. I told her I was fine. Then I said, "I need to talk to you about something." She looked at me, measuring. That slight wariness that people have when they know, on some level, that a conversation they've been avoiding is about to happen. "Okay," she said. I told her I knew about Marcus. I didn't build to it. I didn't lead with the receipt or walk her through the evidence in sequence. I just said his name calmly and watched her face. She went very still. And then, and I'll give her this, she was composed. She said, "What are you talking about?" Which, honestly, was almost impressive. The question was delivered with just enough bewilderment to buy her time. I said, "You don't have to do that." She looked at me for a long moment. Then something shifted in her expression. Not guilt, not yet. More like recalculation, like she was deciding which version of this conversation to have. "No. I have the receipt from Meridian," I said. "I have the card statements. I have the timeline. I know what the hotel was for. I know where his office is. I don't need you to explain it to me." Silence. Real silence this time. She put the water glass down on the coffee table, very carefully, like she was buying herself the half-second she needed. "It's not what you're thinking," she said. And there it was. I'd always found that line fascinating. As if there's some reading of a two-person dinner 40 minutes from home, at a candlelit restaurant, followed by a hotel and months of distance and a text that starts with "last night," was some reading where it's something else entirely. Some reading I just hadn't considered. I didn't say that. I said, very evenly, "I'm not going to do the back and forth on this, Emily." She tried a different angle. Started to cry, and I want to be fair, I think the emotion was real. I don't think it was entirely performance. But it was also the kind of crying that expects something in return. That expects me to soften, to move toward her, to make it about comfort. I didn't move. She said she was sorry, that it had been a mistake, that it didn't mean anything. I remember thinking, these are the lines, these are the exact lines. Not because she was being dishonest about the feeling in them, I think part of her meant all of it, but because I'd heard her carefully construct narratives for years. I'd watched her manage rooms, manage impressions, manage the way things appeared from the outside. And this was the same skill set turned on me at full volume. In the moment where it mattered most, I said, "The comment you made at dinner tonight." She looked confused, or performed confused. I couldn't tell anymore, which I suppose was part of the problem. "About choosing someone else," I said. She shook her head. "I was joking, Noah. You know how I know," I said. "That's the thing. I know exactly how you are." Long pause. I told her I wasn't going to have a long conversation about this, that I'd had months of long conversations with myself about it, and they were finished. I told her I'd be staying with my friend Garrett for the time being while we figured out the practical side of things. I had, in fact, already told Garrett this was coming. He had a spare room and about 0 questions. Emily's composure cracked. The crying shifted register, became less controlled, more raw. She asked if we could try counseling. She asked what she was supposed to do. She said she didn't want to lose the marriage. I thought about that. I thought about the dinner table, the tilted head and the well-timed smile. He means well. The half-second delay on Dana's face, the phone under the pillow, the practiced casualness, the 7 words delivered like they were nothing. I should have chosen someone else. I said, "I think you already answered that one. I had a bag packed." I'd done it quietly over the previous 2 days, a few things at a time so it wouldn't be obvious. I got it from the bedroom closet. Came back through the living room where Emily was sitting on the couch, her hands over her face. I stood there for a second. Not because I was uncertain, because some things deserve a second before you close them. Then I said goodbye, and I meant it. 6 months later, I moved into my own apartment 2 months after leaving. A 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building near a park I used to run past and always think I'd like to live near there. So I did. The divorce process was handled mostly through lawyers and was, by mutual agreement, relatively civil. I think Emily understood that I wasn't coming back. I think she'd expected that understanding to feel different than it did. I got the director role. I'd actually already gotten it before that last dinner, before that last sentence she said at the table, and I've thought about that timing a fair amount. I went from "Are you sure that's the right fit?" to director level in the same 4-week window. I found a trainer and started working out consistently for the first time in years. Not for anyone else, just because I wanted to feel like someone who was building something rather than managing something. I started saying yes to things I used to decline because the timing wasn't convenient or because it would require too much explanation. Trips, late dinners, spontaneous plans. Small things that add up to a life that's actually yours. Daniel reached out about 3 months in, separate from Emily, on his own. Said he'd been thinking about that dinner, about what she'd said. He didn't make excuses for her. He just said he was sorry he hadn't said something in the moment. I told him I appreciated that and that none of this was on him. We still talk. Her parents, I think they know something about what happened, though I don't know how much. Her mother sent me a card at Christmas. I keep it in a drawer. That one's complicated. Then, about 5.5 months after the night I left, I got a message from Emily. I'd expected it. Not the specific timing, but the fact of it. There are things people do when they've been waiting for someone to come back, and the coming back doesn't happen. The message was long. Longer than anything she'd said to me in the final year of our marriage. Detailed in a way our conversations rarely were. She said she'd been in therapy, that she understood now what she'd been doing, not just the affair, but the years before it. The public comments, the dismissiveness. She said she'd been protecting herself from something by making me smaller, and that she understood, finally, how wrong that was. I read the whole thing. Then I read it again, because it was genuinely a thoughtful message, the kind of thing that earlier in our marriage, much earlier, might have cracked something open in me, the kind of message that knew how to find the right door. I sat with it for 2 days before I responded. My response was short. I told her I was glad she was in therapy and that I meant that sincerely. I told her that I believed she was being honest about what she'd written. And I told her that I didn't have a different future in mind than the one I was already building. She wrote back once more, a shorter message. She said she understood. She wished me well. I think she meant that too. I wished her the same. And that was the end of it. Here's the thing I've thought about the most in the months since all of this happened. It wasn't the affair that broke the marriage. I want to be honest about that. The affair was a symptom. What broke the marriage was the long, quiet, consistent message I received over years that I was someone to be managed rather than someone to be chosen. I should have chosen someone else. She said it like a joke. But jokes, when they keep coming in the same direction, aren't jokes anymore. They're just the truth delivered with plausible deniability. I believed for a long time that steadiness was enough, that if nothing was dramatically wrong, things must be okay. What I know now is that okay is not the same as good. And fine is not a destination. It's a holding pattern. I don't think I'm going to tell you some version of I'm better off that sounds like a motivational poster. But I will tell you this. I ran through the park near my apartment this morning before work. The sun was doing something specific to the light through the trees that I would not have been able to describe to you a year ago, because I would not have been looking at it. I was looking at it today. That's something. That's actually quite a lot. And at this point, there really wasn't anything left to say. Just forward.